to go ahead and get everything started. Hi, Guillaume. Saw that in the chat. Thank you for coming to the webinar today. Today, we're going to talk about from Sandbox to production and beyond, everything about Salto and Jira and making sure that you can get your configuration moved from Sandbox to production, as well as other sites. And with that, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Kirk Debates. I am a customer engineer here at Salto. What that entails is advising people when they're in the pre-sales process to ensure that Salto is a good fit. They understand where we fit in the Jira infrastructure or ecosystem, I should say. And then that also carries over into the post-sale, excuse me, the post-sale functions where we help to onboard as well. So there are several members of my team. I'm just one of them who's guiding you through the webinar today. So, which all of you guys know, since you're here, is that SaaS apps run the modern company. That's not just here on the IT side where we're talking about Jira, but also in the sales side with Salesforce, operations over there with NetSuite, customer support with Zendesk, as well as a gazillion other SaaS applications. It's kind of become the new norm for SaaS to be everywhere. The challenge is all these apps require deep customizations to make them work for your organization. Excuse me. Now, most of these are no and low code tools that are used entirely throughout the stack, Jira being one of them. But having that low code, no code mentality does come with some unique challenges. First, how do we really know what actually is implemented when we do an implementation? Why was the change made? Who did it? When did they do it? What's the impact of this planned change? And how do we develop changes reliably without impacting production, which is why I asked about the sandbox. Additionally, how do we review those changes and create collective code ownership? How do we reliably promote those changes to production? What happens if we need to roll back? Can we do it? What's the pain in that? And how do we keep a paper trail for your compliance? I'm sure there's other challenges out there that we haven't come up with. These are the ones that are going to be kind of my top focus today. So Salto was kind of built to solve those problems, with those challenges that we just talked about. Ideally, what we want to do is take the best practices and the tools from the DevOps movement that has been already taking over the IT environment for a couple of decades now, and turn that on its head so that it focuses a little bit more on the SaaS platforms. And that way, all of the SaaS teams get all of the same benefits that our traditional IT code development teams get. Enough of the slides. It is now demo time. So let's go ahead and take a look at Salto. This is the user interface to Salto. Everything starts off with a fetch. This is where we go out, we connect to the API endpoints for your Jira instance. We pull down all of the metadata. Again, we only deal with metadata, not the individual, actual transactional data. So you're not going to see a Jira ticket in our system, just the structure around that, ticket forms, ticket fields, etc. As we're pulling that in, we're going to convert the response from your API endpoints to a file format that we call NACL. It's not another configuration language. It's very text-based, and if you're familiar at all with Terraform, it will look very familiar because it is based on HCL, the Terraform language. Because that's very text-based, it allows us to do a lot of analysis on the individual elements coming into the system, and it allows us to identify all of the dependencies that occur. As we finish processing, we're going to put all of those into this dependency tree over here. And this allows you to navigate everything that you would want to find in your, find out about your Jira instance. Perhaps you need to know about an automation, or you want to look up some kind of specific board. Maybe you just care about, your specific projects, whether that's Service Desk or just traditional Jira software. We support both. Screens, or I like to start working with the workflows. And here I have a workflow from my, from my marketing team that they want something special for their new blog post. This is our representation of the workflow inside Salto. If we wanted to see that in Jira, where we get to see the more traditional lines and everything, we can go ahead and open that in my Sandbox environment, because right here I am in my Sandbox environment. But for now, I'm just going to stay here in Salto. This has everything that you would expect to see for a workflow, so that we are able to instantiate it in any target, whether that's the different statuses or all of the transitions, as well as the initial entry. More importantly, at least from our perspective, we get to show you, the output of that analysis. That would be the dependencies. This is only, this workflow is only used by a single workflow scheme, but it depends on 10 other things. We have 6 statuses, 2 issue events, a project role, and a group. If we take a look at one of these statuses, everywhere that you see this purple with a black underscore allows us to drill through to that. So we can understand not just on the individual element, how is this connected, but also to all of those connected elements. How if I make a change here, how does that impact there? Okay, now that that area is impacted, what could this potentially impact as well? And we can see that this particular status, it's used by 14 things. So a little bit more, a little bit higher impact than if you changed something in that new blog workflow, which is only used by one thing. So, and by being able to navigate up and down the tree, it allows us to get a picture of what that impact would be should we try to make a change in any of those environments. I should have mentioned at the beginning of the call, if you have any questions as we're going through, please put them in the Q&A section of the webinar for Zoom, and we'll get to those as we get to the end of the demo. So once we understand what the impact is for any of those changes, typically what we're going to want to do is deploy those. And that all starts from our compare and deploy mechanism. We have several different mechanisms for doing deployments. Today, I'm going to focus on a few of them. We're going to start with the compare and deploy. We're also going to talk about restoring from a previous version and reverting. But as I mentioned, we start with that comparison. So all we're going to do is we're going to take the dependency tree from my Sandbox and compare that to the dependency tree for my production. And let's deploy that blog workflow. And since I have a Jira ticket for it right here, BizApp 449, that will allow me to tie everything together between this and Git and my Jira ticket itself. So we go ahead and we do the comparison. And what this is doing is comparing the dependency trees from both Sandbox and production and presenting me back with only the differences. So what we're saying here is to make production look like my Sandbox, I have 153 total changes. 40 of those are additions, meaning they're in Sandbox but not production. 75 deletions, meaning they're in production but not Sandbox. And 38 modifications, meaning they're in both, but there's something different. If we want to see what those differences are, it's just a matter of drilling in. and it will take you directly to the location. Personally, I prefer the changes view because it grays out everything that is not there. It just allows me to focus a little bit better, but it's entirely your choice. If you are somebody who is more kind of code oriented, we also give you, kind of a side-by-side comparison of the underlying NACL files. Again, those are not another configuration language, the language we developed to make all of this stuff possible. So that gives you a pretty good estimate of how to look at what the changes are in between things. But ultimately, what we said we were going to do is deploy that workflow. So let's find that blog workflow just by navigating here. We can also filter, so I can just as easily type in blog and get to the blog post that way. As soon as I select that, you can see that it identifies that I have 5 required dependencies and 2 additional dependencies. If we want to see what that looks like, we've got a couple of options. First, we can just drill into it and take a look at the individual element. We can see that this depends on, I still have 4 of those statuses still need to be adjusted in some way, shape, or form, and a group also needs to be moved over. We can go ahead and select that from here. What I typically find more of my customers doing is they're going to work on things in a project. So, they'll in this particular case, I've got a workflow and a screen that may need to come over. And you can see that they have different dependencies, but ultimately we have this missing dependency here. We'll clear the filter, which allows us to see everything that is still necessary. So I'm going to take all those statuses and that custom field. And after we selected the custom field, you see that we're still left with the missing dependency. It's because the field in turn needs a context to go with it. So we're going to bring over that context as well. So now that we have 0 dependencies, that means we have a technically complete package, which just means that there's no reason for Jira to refuse to do the work on our behalf outright. Additionally, we have these other dependencies. These are things that reference something that's in my selected package. There's no technical reason to bring them over, but there may be a business reason to bring them over. I have a few more screens that are impacted by some of those columns or fields that I brought over. I don't think I need those. I am though bringing over a workflow, so I'm going to want to modify that workflow scheme that I'm working on as well. Not technically required, but it is one of our business rules here. So we're going to bring that over as well. Once we're happy with everything that's in our package, then it's just a matter of previewing the deployment. So we're going to do a few things here as we preview this deployment. First thing we're going to do is put things in order. We know that that workflow depends on those statuses, so the statuses have to go in first. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to, excuse me, take advantage of everything that we've already done as far as deployments into Jira situations. And anytime that we have identified something that is recurring or a common problem, we create what we call a change validator, but you guys can just think of them as checks that make sure that your deployment does not contain any of those kind of challenges. If there are fatal challenges, they will show up here on the will not be deployed tab, as well as hints as to what might be done to correct the problem that is keeping it from being deployed. I don't have any of those today, so it's okay for me to go ahead and move forward. But something I want to point out, this is a great way to allow your teams to review what it is that you're going to deploy before actually deploying it. Everybody can come in and do this inspection before the deployment. That way, it allows you to get more eyes on that. As a side note, we also have the ability to integrate with your existing Git implementation, whether that's GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, um, and have the potential of integrating with the pull request system there. So we can, in fact, require somebody else to approve that pull request before before the deploy button even becomes available. It's an additional option, definitely not mandatory, but something that you may want to incorporate in your implementation. Don't have that here, so it's safe for me to just go ahead and deploy. I'm getting this sensitive environment warning because I've identified my production environment as sensitive. Just allows me one last check to make sure that I really want to do what it is that I say that I'm getting ready to do. As this, um, you know, at this point, what's going on is we are instantiating those objects in Jira, and of course, we get a status report back from everything that occurred. Here, everything was deployed successfully, so we have 10 elements were deployed. If something had failed, we would identify the objects that failed here on the field to deploy, as well as the errors that occurred. If it's an error that we understand and know about, we'll give you hints on how you might go about addressing those, the things that caused the failure. And of course, since we know the order that things need to go in, if one of those statuses had failed, the workflow would have ended up here on weren't attempted, because it doesn't make sense to deploy the workflow if all of the statuses aren't there. It's going to fail, so why even attempt it? So, so that's how we, excuse me. So that's how we go about deploying things from one environment to another. Another thing that we have the ability to do is, if for some reason we want to revert this back, this caused some kind of problem, we can revert the deployment here and it will take out everything that um, we just did with this unit of work. Another thing that we can do that does not require us to have deployed through Salto is we can restore to a previous version. So how this works is every time that we fetch and we determine there's been a change in your configuration, we take a note of that and set that as a restore point. So I can go, since I just deployed today, I can go back to yesterday's, the state of the environment yesterday, and compare that to the state of my environment right now. So what we're going to do at this point is go back and look at it and say, hey, what all occurred, in the last, since May 27th at 6:27 a.m. And this allows us to then cherry pick what are the things that we need to reverse out. Perhaps we only care about getting rid of that screen because it wasn't actually ready to go for production. We can be super selective, or if we choose to, we can back everything out. Again, this works just like it did during the deployment phase. You can be as selective as you need to be, as long as you have all of the dependencies met. So if I take out this dependency, you can see here that we have dependencies that are required because this is. So we're just going to select that again. Again, we go through that same step where we preview it, putting stuff in the right order. Now, this time, kind of the reverse has to happen. That workflow comes out before the statuses. And then also look for, gotchas. We don't see any gotchas, so that allows us to just go ahead and deploy, and that will revert everything back out. And here we can see that everything was reversed out. We have the minus sign for the status in the screen. I have a JSM field configuration that was modified, removing the uh, whatever was modified in that. Take a look at that if we like. Um, just took my custom status button out, radio button out of it. And like I said, just put everything back to the same state that it was on May 28th at 3:23 p.m. Or sorry, May 27th at 6:27 a.m. Sorry about that. So those are just a couple of the mechanisms that we have for making sure that you can manage all of the elements in your environment, regardless of which environment they're in. Now, while today I have migrated from Sandbox to production, we can also go the other direction. We don't care what the two targets are. Sorry, what the source and target are. It can go from Sandbox to production, production to Sandbox. If you're one of the few that have multiple sandboxes, you can do Sandbox to Sandbox. All of those options are available. Now, something else I'd like to point out is we have the ability to monitor those changes. This allows you to get notifications of any changes that are being made in your environment. I'm sure some of you still have admins in production that you would prefer not to have as much power as they do. So this allows us to, let's catch all changes with this one. So for this, we can get super granular. You can see here that on a previous one, I only care about specific workflow changes. But for this one, I'm going to catch any change, whether it's a modification, addition, or deletion. And I'm going to do it for everything. Now, we don't have to. As I mentioned, we can get super granular with this. For instance, if I only care about the configuration settings for Jira, I can just select that. Or, like I said, for today, since it is catch all changes, I'm going to catch everything. We have a couple of different mechanisms for doing this. First is email. Second is Slack. This we can just go to admins@salto.io. So we can do this to distribution lists, or you can do it to individuals. You can add or remove as many email addresses or Slack channels as you like. We also give you the ability to choose what it is that you're going to monitor. Do we just care about the changes that happen in Jira outside of Salto? We can just do that. If you only care about the Salto deployments, we can just do that. By default, though, we're going to check whether it was done directly in Jira or through our Salto environments. Once I save that, now every time that we do a fetch, we're going to check any changes that have occurred against the conditions in my monitors, which will then allow us to understand that a change has been made. You may or may not already have known about it, but it at least gives you a heads up that something has changed in that environment. And then finally, I wanted to point out, okay, there we go, that we are optionally connected to your Git system, as I mentioned briefly earlier. This allows us to push all of those changes over to your Git environment. That way, not only do you have a history of all of the changes that have been made to your environment here in Salto, but you can also track those changes in a third-party environment like your Git provider, which will allow us to go over and take a look at what was done. And here, this is where we were restoring that to a previous environment. So we're going to see a lot of deletes in here. Had we looked at the one where we deployed it, we're going to see lots of adds. So several green things right here. I did bring up that we are going to link this over to the Jira ticket. So I've done 2 deployments. Well, only one deployment with this BizApp 449. Currently, we're at 29 commits and 4 branches. And when I refresh that, we should see that We now have 30 commits, the last one being about 9 minutes ago, which then allows us to go out and we can drill into uh, that same check-in that allows us to take a look at things. If you're coming in strictly from the Jira perspective and came in to Git, you can also then turn around and go to that deployment back here in Salto. So that is everything that I had prepared. I see that I have a lot of questions out there. So I'm going to leave it up back over here in my sandbox. And I will end the poll and go ahead and publish those. Looks like most people are doing this manually, and um, some are using another third-party tool, and a couple of us don't have a sandbox. So let's go ahead and stop with that. So, all right, so now let's get to the Q&A. All right, we did have some people that had questions from beforehand, so I'm going to start with those. How to automatically copy specific objects between sites. I believe we just saw that with the compare and deploy. And again, it doesn't matter which direction we're going, whether it's sandbox to production or production to sandbox, we would use that compare and deploy mechanism. When we start talking about, the next question is, how do I see dependencies? We talked about that on the Explore tab, where we can take a look. We'll pick an automation this time. And this automation depends on a project, a status, and 2 fields. Just navigate to the bottom of the element that you're looking at. And as it allows you to drill through it, we can see all of the dependencies, allowing us to go up and down the chain. Next question that was mailed in was, can I update the sandbox with some of, but not all of the prod projects, and how granular? We talked about that on the compare and deploy screen. You'll remember that I selected just the workflow and the required objects to come over with it. So how granular is, ultimately it can come down to the smallest of just a single element, unless of course that element depends on something else to be deployed successfully. So I'll give that a qualified down to the element. And next we have, can I deploy sandbox workflow changes to prod without manually re-implementing them? And that's exactly what I did in the demo, which actually I'm cheating a little bit here. I took that question and used that as my example today. All right, so let's get to the remainder of the Q&A. Okay. And the first question was, what do you mean by metadata? Is that Jira configurations within a project, or is there more data included? Well, it's more than just projects. As I mentioned, it's everything that could potentially be associated with that project. So we have, application roles, groups. Those are typically outside of projects. They're related to them, but not directly impacting them. One thing that you will notice is that we don't bring over users. Part of our SOC 2 compliance strategy is to not bring in anything that has personal identifying information. So users would be some of those. So you'll notice that we don't bring those in. So like I said, metadata is specifically everything outside of the transactional data in your Jira system. Next question is, Salta is a Jira plugin. That answer is not really. You will find us in the Jira Marketplace, but you can't purchase us there, and there's nothing really to install. We act externally to Salto, and we connect to it using external credentials. Um, Next question was, can Salto handle custom fields? Yes. I don't have any in, oh, actually I did have one in this environment and we did deploy it. Those were my custom status field. And if you remember when I brought over the screen that went with the blog workflow, it required this custom status and that allowed us to bring that in as well. Um, can Salto handle revert in the case of issues? Yes, showed you a couple of different ways to do that, just as a reminder. Um, well, got to be in some place where I've done when we deployed this, we had the ability to revert the deployment, but what I actually chose to do was to restore using the restore to a previous version. Both ways are perfectly acceptable. Just depends on what your particular use case is and how best to back things out. All right. Next question is, why did we see several items under deletions in the initial analysis, but then zero under will be deleted in the deployment preview? All right, so let me review that again real quick. So let's go to my Jira and example there. So these deletions are deletions that are available. So these are things that, like I said, exist in production, but not in my sandbox. So to make my production look like my sandbox, I would have to delete them. The reason we didn't see any in any of my deployments is because I was choosing to not select these. Again, we get very granular with what we deploy. It's not an all or nothing situation. So this allowed us to, not have to delete anything from production when we did those deployments over to, from sandbox to production. All right, the next question we see, lots of good questions today. Thank you, guys. If we restore to a previous point, does that impact any new tickets created between the restore points? Uh, that is potentially yes. Those are typically handled by triggers inside your environment. For instance, if you had a ticket that had, a status that we removed since we restored it to a previous time when that status didn't exist, you'll get prompted on um, how you want those assigned before we can actually delete the thing. So if we want to change closed, which was one of the things that we deployed over to done, because that is still in the system, we'd have to answer that question and allow that to happen. All right. Next question. In JSM, does this work for assets, object types, attributes, structure, etc., and asset custom field? The answer is no. For some of that, yes. So the attributes in the structure, yes. The object types, yes. The individual assets are not being brought over just yet. I don't know if that's on our roadmap. I will have to look that up. And looks like that same question got asked again. Is there a reporting option? For example, export to CSV. Yeah, actually, that is what this button does. And how I have a lot of teams using this is they look at they look at all changes and go ahead and export this. That allows them to use this as kind of, use this as part of their project planning. So they understand what the differences are, what needs to be migrated or not, and that they can then use that CSV export to, to identify and plug things into their project plan. Okay, next question. Can you group changes? For example, if I'm working on changes for two issues, I'd like there to uh, be able to say compare and deploy just the changes for those associated with ASP1. That way I don't have to manually exclude any changes for ASP2. Absolutely. While I only while I only showed them as happening one at a time, we can certainly do, well, let's add this one. We'll add the missing dependencies, more missing dependencies, and more missing dependencies. And so that's my example compare. I can then turn around and do another example compare. Example two compare. And I can pick something else entirely, and have those exist both staged, ready to go. And we'll say that those are here in the draft. Something in this example compare is also included in the example two compare. After the example compare runs, we'll evaluate everything that's in this example two. And after the first deployment, we will take out anything that has already been deployed. That way, if you do have any overlap, you don't have to worry about deploying on top of each other. So hope that answers that question. Next question is, does this work the same for DC and for cloud? That answer is yes. Ultimately, the um, the look and feel is identical. The underlying NACL files are slightly different because the API responses are slightly different between data center and cloud. So all of the functionality is here. You might see slight differences in the way that the elements are presented. All right. Are we able to automate fetches to benefit from the change monitoring without triggering it manually? Yes, and I should have mentioned that. We have the ability to fetch, either daily, hourly, or weekly. Or if you just want to do it manually all the time, you can do it as none. The vast majority of my customers do it daily because that fits their schedule. So that's a very long answer to yes, you can be scheduled. All right. Can we include custom field from other vendor like Divinity? And for that, I'm going to have to uh, come back and answer that after the fact. Just because I don't know if Divinity is one of the ones that we're able to capture. Some things we are, some things we're not. There's a list on our website of what it is that we support. Since we have the configuration info, can I compare two objects of the same type? For example, can I see the differences between two notification schemes? So that answers yes. Let's see if I have, well, let's look at notification scheme since you actually looked at that. Oh, I only have one notification scheme. But let me look at automations are good for this. If I click on this, I can compare with another instance. So I can pick one of the other automations. When I compare that, it will tell me everything that's different. These are vastly different. So everything is going to show up as a different, well, I guess not everything. Author is still there. And this follows that same mechanism as far as being what you are able to see and how it's presented as well. Does it support any app plugin configurations? JSM, I guess, is kind of an app configuration, and Script Runner are both currently available out there. And you can keep an eye on our supported objects um, uh, in our help docs, and that will, every time that we update and add an additional plugin, you'll see it as supported there. All right. Next question. For monitor changes, do I get notified for any new creations or just get notified only changes to existing configs? Again, that depends on how you choose to select things. In my example where I chose to monitor everything, including additions, modifications, and deletions will all get done. So if you choose additions and choose a specific type, we'll say a workflow, then any changes or additions will be included in that. Are there elements that cannot be deployed? I know that answer is yes. I don't have them stored in the top of my brain though. There are a couple of minor things where we can show them here in the tree, but it's something that Jira doesn't support programmatically either instantiating or modifying. So we're limited by the API. We do have a list of those on the support page though. Let's see. Can we have scheduled automation to push changes from one site to another? I do have customers that do that. The way that that is incorporated is through that additional connection to your Git provider. So that is, done by way of, typically done, in GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps. Ultimately, we do have a command line interface. So in theory, you could do it manually outside of those, but we typically see them mostly implemented as part of a CI/CD process, which, like I said, incorporates the use of your Git provider. And how does the licensing work? How do you count tokens? So there are a few ways that we can do that. First and easiest is to just connect your system to Salto. And when we come down here to settings, we can see a plan and usage. And you'll see, well, you can see it for all of my systems in here. But if you just want to use here's my Salto production. This gives me the count of everything that is that is currently in use for my production instance here. Another way that you can do it, we have a Salto element counter Chrome extension. So we can also use that. For instance, if I go over to there and use the Salto element counter, you can see that we have 41 boards, 138 filters, 35 projects, or you can go through and count them by hand. If you're interested to understand the pricing, salto.io/pricing. We have a full page on this, including how our pricing works and how the tokens all get introduced. We're specifically talking about Jira, so you can see that these are the elements that we count. If you want a more detailed discussion on this, I would recommend, we're going to put up a link towards the end so you can contact somebody for a demo so we can get into a more detailed discussion with that as well. Let's see. Can you explain how the security works? Okay, that's kind of a big topic. Okay, so there are a couple of different layers of security that are going on. First is the security to come into Salto itself. And that's handled just through username, password. You can connect with Google. We can set up SSO for you so that you can use your identity provider to allow people into Salto. Once you're in Salto, that allows you to browse everything on the Explore tab. But to be able to do any kind of deployment, this is where we respect your credentials for the target environment. So if I don't have permissions to create workflows in my production environment, then my deployment, when I went to that preview deployment, would have told me that I don't have enough permissions to do that deployment, and would have shown, hey, get better credentials, I think is what the recommendation is, or get different credentials. So that's how we kind of make sure that the people who should be deploying are deploying, is by respecting the credentials in the target environments. And the last question on here is, how does mapping work between the instances? By the element's name or the ID? So the Jira ID is not is definitely not it. And that's simply because, no matter what, no matter what we do, those Jira IDs are not going to be in line, and we're not going to maintain a map of those. What we do is we create a Salto ID, and that Salto ID may consist of the element's name. It sometimes consists of the element's name plus additional attributes around it. Active versus inactive, for instance, is one of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. And basically what we do is we concatenate enough of those, the name plus special attributes, so that we can get something that's unique, but will be the same across environments. So it's, ultimately the answer is by Salto ID. And coming up with that Salto ID is something that one of us, as a customer engineer, can help you work with if you need something that is outside of the norm. All right. We have about 10 minutes left, and that's the last of my questions. So I'll give you guys about 10 more seconds to see if I have anybody else asking questions. Oh, I see a couple of them over in the chat. Hold on, let's just make sure that. And it looks like all of those were covered in the other questions that we had in the Q&A. So, all right, I don't see any new questions in the Q&A section. So in that case, I'll go back over here, kind of finish out the slides. Ultimately, this slide is about, don't trust us, trust the people who use us. We have lots of customers out there, lots of big names that you know, some smaller names that you don't know, and some of these are even big names that you don't know, out there that are using us successfully, every day. This is a great example of everybody who's, I'd love to say everybody, but this is a small sample of everyone who's using us, so that we can, happy to let you know that, you're not alone when you're out there with us. So to kind of recap, ultimately what our goal is to treat Jira and JSM configurations like code. That allows us to then use all of those DevOps tools and DevOps methodologies for doing that comparison before your deployment, previewing it, making sure that everything is safe to deploy. It allows all of that to happen, behind the scenes. We do allow you to automatically copy specific objects between sites. It's not an all or nothing copy. And we also have the ability to quickly restore things, as you saw today, from we call it a scheduled backup, but ultimately it's from a previous fetch, so that we took a snapshot at that time. All right. So thank you guys for your attention today. It was a pleasure meeting all of you, and I hope to hear from you soon on demo request. Thanks, everyone.